Now I want to talk about a few red intertidal species and green species and their life histories. This is such a common seaweed, especially in Central California and Northern California. This is Endocladia muricata. Forms, you probably noticed these tufts in some of the pictures I've already shown you. Tufts growing among, what's this? This is fucus. Flat blades. These are very young little fucus hatchlings. We're in the mussel zone here and above, where Endocladia muricata forms these tufts. Nice moisture. You can even see some of the moisture in the crevices here that's been held by this seaweed. Rough. It forms these little tiny spines on the branch. And if you have a hand lens, you can see them easily like this, or you can feel them with your fingers. And this is very distinctive for this weed. There are some other tufted red seaweeds, but none with this kind of branching, open branching, and these little spines. Endocladia muricata. Some of my students have called it the Brillo pad weed because it's so rough to the touch. Another one in the upper mid-intertidal zone, often found with rockweeds, is Chondracanthus canaliculatus. Mostly in Southern California, but it comes all the way up to Monterey and beyond. But look at the variation in color. This is from Catalina Island, where that high UV has bleached it out. But if you look deep down inside, it's darker because it has shaded itself and maintained those red pigments and moisture. Here's Central California. You can see a flattened branch with lateral branches and little pointed secondary lateral branches. Sometimes they can even look pinnate, like a feather. Very, very variable. These are actually from the Farallon Islands. You can see it's flattened, lateral blades, little spiky secondary blades. Here's the holdfast and how it's growing out. So incredibly varied morphological variation. But if you look closely and pull on it, it's rubbery and stretchy, like many of the other species in this genus. Chondracanthus canaliculatus. Lots of undergraduate jokes about that name. Now, this is one of the most common seaweeds, especially in Northern California, that you'll find associated with those rockweeds. This is the genus Mastocarpus. And in this picture, you can see Endocladia in here mixed in. And there could very well be some Chondracanthus, but we see a narrow bladed tufted plant, and we see a wide bladed tufted plant. This is Mastocarpus. When I was young, there were 2 species on our coast. Now there are 11 because DNA sequencing has shown that this is a much more diverse species than we originally thought. You can see the distribution of the Mastocarpus species along the coast. Here's one in Japan, Russia. We get to the Aleutian Islands, and we have actually 3 species, and so on down until we get into California. Here's Vancouver, BC, lots of species. Northern California, lots of species. And then as we go further south, there are far fewer species till we get to Baja California. There's only 1 here. Chile, there's also 1. And there are European species of Mastocarpus as well. And there's 1 on our East Coast too. The problem is there are some differences in the way the papillae, these little bumps on the surface of the blade, are arranged. But this is not a very reliable character, I'm sorry to say, except for a few of them. So generally what we do is we just say Mastocarpus species unknown. We just go to genus with this so that we're right about one thing. We're right about the genus, and we won't be wrong about the species by just guessing. One of my goals in life is to try to find more characters, morphological characters that help us distinguish these. But let's just look at them close up anyway. Here is what is very likely to be Mastocarpus papillatus, the broad-bladed, small little papillae bumps, smooth bumps on the surface of the blade. Here's the narrow one I showed you in the last picture, where the bumps are more prominent, longer, not as evenly distributed. There's this kind of ridge along the edge. Papillatus has a ridge too. And interestingly, these are dioecious. This genus is dioecious. The female has the little papillae and is usually dark. The male tends to be a much thinner, lighter colored blade without papillae, or with very few papillae at the base. So in a population, at the right time of year, males are usually fairly seasonal. You see both males and females in the population. The papillae are the structures on the females that bear the eggs. So these are flat, dichotomous blades. We've heard that story before. Very common convergent evolution, very common form. Rubbery, stretchy, bumps on the surface. And let me tell you, this is the foliose or blade-like haploid phase. These have one set of chromosomes. So the logical next question is, what is the diploid phase? It's separate, it's different. It's this, it's a crust. The diploid phase of Mastocarpus is a crust. The haploid phase of Mastocarpus is a blade, both male and female. So this is a different kind of life history. It's different in several ways. It's a red algal life history, which is different. And it has two free living phases. The diplontic life history, like you and me, we're the only free living phase. Here we have a foliose free living phase and a crustose free living phase. Just amazing. So let's talk about this life history. It is triphasic. It consists of two free living phases, a sporophyte called a tetrasporophyte and a gametophyte. The sporophyte is diploid, the gametophyte is haploid, male and female. Not always dioecious, but in this example they are. So let's go through the great wheel of life here. And let's start with the diploid like we did before with the diplontic life history. Cells on the tetrasporophyte, and in Mastocarpus, this is a crust. I didn't draw it that way. I just made a general red alga. That crust, certain cells undergo meiosis to form 4 spores, hence the tetra. Those tetraspores grow into gametophytes, the second free living phase. The female gametophyte forms eggs, for example, on Mastocarpus in those little papillae. And the egg is not released like in Fucus pelviciopsis sylvitia. The egg is retained inside the body of the female. But the egg puts up a little thread. The egg is called a carpegonium in this life. That little thread is receptive to a male gamete. The males produce those male gametes, release them into the water. They have mucilaginous kind of wings that help them stay buoyant and help them move with the current. And that little spermatium has to contact a little thread from the embedded egg on that female gametophyte. So Zachary, here we're in the world of fertilization. It seems like it's impossible. The great ocean moves the spermatium to a thread. Fertilization takes place inside the female. And that fertilized zygote grows through mitosis. Of course, it's diploid, it's a zygote, we're in the red here. I should have made this red. Please forgive me. All of this is red. So this little tissue inside the female is called the carposporophyte. It's a little diploid sporophyte that's making spores. Those spores are released and grow into the tetrasporophyte, the second diploid phase. This is a free living diploid phase, but this is not free living. It's inside and protected by the female gametophyte. So the carposporophyte is diploid, the tetrasporophyte is diploid, the gametophytes are haploid. There are two free living phases, the gametophytes bearing gametes and the sporophyte bearing spores. This is not free living. It's born and incubated by the female, this little carposporophyte. So do you see how we have three phases, but only two free living phases, and how the spermation is the only motile part of this life history, the only part that moves? It has to find a female plant with that little egg thread that's receptive for fertilization. The amazing thing is if you go and look at seaweeds, or if you remember that picture of Mastocarpus gametophyte, they're covered with carposporophytes. Fertilization is frequent in this life history. But for every fertilization you get, you not only get one plant from the zygote, you multiply that zygote into many spores that grow into many tetrasporophytes. So this is like an amplification stage in the life history. Triphasic, two diploid, one haploid. In Mastocarpus, this would be the crust, and this would be the foliose female gametophyte and male gametophyte. Green algae, one of the more ubiquitous ones in the upper intertidal that you'll see and say, wow, that very much resembles a moss. It is an alga, Cladophora columbiana, cushions formed of filaments. So this is a filamentous seaweed, and you can't quite see the cells, but you can see the individual filaments here. Again, they like to be in crevices where there's a little bit of water, but they can grow on emergent substrate and hold water very well. You often find marine tiny worms and other invertebrates growing in this plant. Cladophora columbiana. Another green in the same genus, far more common in Southern California, goes all the way up to Monterey though. Monterey is a hot spot. It's a warm spot and gets some of the Southern California species there. Cladophora graminea like grass or grain, or tufts of stiff branched filaments. And here it's more easy to see the filaments because the cells are so big. And I can't really see the cross walls here, but there are cross walls delimiting this into long rectangular cells. So here the cells are exposed to the water. There's no tissue. This is a filament. So we've seen blades, we've seen crusts, and these are very, very successful filaments. They're fragile, but the cell walls surrounding these filaments are relatively tough. Things do like to eat them though. So let's look at the green algal life history. And I'm going to give you, there are actually many different life histories in all of these groups, but I'm giving the basic patterns so you can get a feel for how seaweeds persist, how they reproduce out there in the intertidal. So again, we have two generations only, two free living generations, the sporophyte and the gametophyte. And I'm giving you a dioecious example with a male and a female. The male makes gametes that have flagella and can swim. The female makes gametes that have 2 flagella and can swim. And they are released, possibly because of the tide or the full moon. And they are released just into the water. And they mate, and they fuse to form a zygote that develops into a sporophyte. The sporophyte and the gametophytes in this life history look the same for Cladophora, for the sea lettuce Ulva. Isomorphic, same form. An alternation of 2 free-living states, phases, a diploid phase and a haploid phase that look identical.